There we go. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today for our 2022 Media Day for Tulsa Community College. We would like to take a moment to welcome you and also thank some of our wonderful faculty, students, and staff who helped put this together. We have to thank our administration, first with President Goodson, Dr. Copeland, Dr. Stone, Dean Clark, Ms. Michelle Dixon, as well as the TCC Marketing and Communications Department, Dr. Bailey with our digital media program, and also our faculty advisor, Mr. Jerry Goodwin, who's here today as well for the student paper. So thank you very much. We'd also like to thank our co-sponsors for the digital media and design program, the Visual Arts Academic Program, as well as KJRH Channel 2, NBC, Circle Cinema, the National Association of Black Journalists Tulsa Chapter, the Oklahoma Eagle, and the Tulsa Press Club. So, all right. And we do have our faculty advisor, Mr. Goodwin, who will be monitoring the chat today. So if you have anything during this call that you would like to ask or some questions on details, please make sure to put those in the chat. He will be watching that today. For quick question regarding closed captioning, we do not have a live transcript available at this moment. This will be available as a recording same day within the next couple hours, and that will have a live transcript available both on Facebook and YouTube. So we apologize if that is something you need for this call at this moment, but we will have that available today. So I would like to welcome my co-moderator for today, Ms. Naomi Keitt. She is a weekend anchor and reporter for KJRH in Tulsa. Prior to Tulsa, she also served as a producer and weekend anchor and reporter affiliated with WRBL in Columbus, Georgia. She also holds a degree in journalism from the University of Georgia. Welcome, Ms. Keitt.
Sam, thank you so much. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you guys today. Thanks so much for jumping on this call and spending some time with us. I have the honor and the privilege of introducing our guest speaker today, and you likely know her from NBC's third hour of today. So this is Miss Sheinelle Jones. In addition to some of her co-hosting responsibilities on the third hour of today, she hosts several NBC-sponsored programs, a monthly wellness show on Peacock TV, and a weekly radio show. That's just a couple of the things that she's doing. Recently, she led a roundtable for NBC, taking an in-depth look at the COVID-19 crisis and its impact on healthcare workers and minority communities. She's also an executive producer of Stories We Tell, The Fertility Secret. And Jones also has some connections right here to Tulsa. She spent a few years working at KOKI, Fox 23, right here in our area. So big welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll just get started right away. I know a lot of people are probably asking, how did you make it here from Tulsa all the way to NBC, the Today Show in New York City? Talk to us just a little bit about your journey.
So by the way, if you guys have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll answer whatever you want. So my very first job, I went to Northwestern University, graduated from Northwestern with a major in broadcast journalism. I did a concentration in Spanish. In 2000, my first job was in Springfield, Illinois. I was a one-man band. And then I was there for about, I was a morning reporter for the first year. And then the second year I started anchoring the morning show there, Nightside Reporter. I did that for a few years. And then my next job was in Tulsa at the Fox affiliate. I started out as the weekend anchor there, Nightside Reporter, and then I became the 5 o'clock anchor there. I did that for several years. And then I moved to Philadelphia, where I was a morning reporter there. And then I got moved to the desk and I anchored morning news in Philadelphia for about 9 years. And then I went to the Today Show. I started on the Today Show as the weekend news reader. And then I became the weekend news anchor for Weekend Today. And now I'm still all over the Today Show corresponding and all that, but my official title is I host the third hour of the Today Show.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I know a lot of people are probably wondering, talk to us about what a typical day in your life looks like as a news anchor.
That's a really good question. I think the reason why I love this job is because no day is the same. Most days I'm on in the earlier hours with the report. So if I'm in the 8 o'clock hour, I'll try to get to work around like 6:15. If I'm filling in on the anchor desk for Hoda or Savannah or Craig, I'll get to work around 5 a.m., 4:45 a.m. So it kind of just depends. The show was the third hours from 9 to 10 Eastern. And then after the show, quite often I have shoots. With COVID, so much has changed. I used to travel a lot, like a couple days a week. I felt like I was flying out somewhere, and I have 3 kids at home. So I was always trying to fly out right after the show, catch like a 11 a.m. flight and be back, by 7 p.m. So it was a lot of that. So the silver lining of COVID was that we do a lot of Zoom interviews now. So I'll go back to my office and do some Zoom interviews. And then I have made it a point post-COVID to try to shut off my schedule after 3 o'clock so that I can pick up my kids from school at 3:30. You heard my climb. So for so long, my life has been work. And so now it's just, I fight for balance of trying to be present at work, but also able to pick up my kids, at 3:30. So that's kind of, and then all of their activities. And sometimes I have shoots. So I have to go in my room and close the door and, and do an interview. And then I come back downstairs and, today they just handed me an interview here in LA in a few hours to, interview the new fire chief. So as soon as I hang up with you or log off of here, then I'll prep for that interview and rush downtown LA. And then I'm trying to get back to New York tonight. So, it's a lot of juggling, but every day you're meeting people who are at the top of their game, if you will. I think the one thing I will say about working at the network is that, if we're interviewing you for the Today Show, odds are you've done something either pretty cool or you're at the top of your craft or whatever it is. So you're constantly brushing shoulders with people who are the best of the best, in my opinion, whether it's, politics or, cooking or, writing or whatever it is, acting, like you're meeting people who are always creating. And I love it.
Absolutely. And I feel like you brought up so many good points, family balance, how COVID has changed things. We're going to get to that in a second, but I wanted to jump back to your first step. I know a lot of people are probably interested in, how do you get that first job? What does that transition from college to that first market look like? What did it look like for you? And what advice do you have to everybody on the call today?
So my advice is, if you are not graduating this year, to me, a huge key is getting an internship. Even if you are working at your local station and you're just printing out papers and running around, just being in a newsroom is huge. Even when I grew up in Wichita, Kansas. And when I was in high school, like I interned at the local CBS affiliate. And then when I was at Northwestern, every summer, I tried to be in somebody's newsroom. So that way, when you graduate, you can try to put a reel together. And so that's what I did. I used my reel for my internships in college. And if it makes you feel any better, every single job I've had, it's been the only offer I got. So it's not like I had all these offers and everything was so easy. I mean, my first job, I think I sent out like 44, if not more, VHS tapes. I mean, I sent them everywhere. And I got one callback eventually in like Beckley, West Virginia. And I was almost going to take that. And then I got another call back from Tulsa, or from Springfield, Illinois, which was about 2.5 hours away from Evanston, Illinois, outside of, Chicago, where I was at Northwestern. And so I thought, okay, let me take the Evanston job, because then I can still visit my friends in Chicago. I was dating my now husband at the time. So I was like, he was still at Northwestern, so I could visit him. My friends were all still in Chicago. So I thought, okay, let me try to do that. And it was rough. I mean, like I said, I was a one-man band. I'm 4'11", so I'm not tall. And back then, 22 years ago, the cameras were bigger than me. The tripods were bigger than me. So it was a lot of lugging equipment around. But you just push through. But it takes, there used to be a website called tvjobs.com. I don't even know if they still have it. And I would look at all the TV markets and I would say, okay, what could I get for a first job realistically? Like, I don't think I could get higher than, let's say, market 80 to like market 144. So I just sent tapes to all the affiliates. And it's sad because I would go to their website and I would say, okay, they need diversity. They don't have anybody Black. They don't have anybody here. And it's sad that it has to be that you have to look and see, okay, maybe they need somebody like me. But at the time, that's what I did. I would like look on the website and look at their team and see if I thought that maybe I could be a good fit or I could bring something to their team. And so I would send VHS tapes to those places based on the literally team photos on their websites. So yeah, it takes a lot. Like you can't just feel like, oh man, I applied to 10 places and nobody called me back. Like, don't worry. You just, because a lot of times, most of the time, it's not even personal. It's just what they're looking for. And so you just send out as many as you can and you just wait for that one call back. And even when I was in Springfield, I started to think, okay, what's next? Waking up at 3 a.m. wasn't easy. I didn't know, I moved to a city where I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any family. I was an AKA, so I got active with the sorority. I used to like to dance. So I would coach a cheerleading squad. Like I tried to make myself part of the city, but I didn't, frankly, I didn't have any family there. So I started thinking about where I could go next. And even then in Springfield, I sent out like 30, 40 tapes and I got crickets, like nothing. And so I called an old news director who was in Tulsa and I said, hey, can I send you my tape? Like I'm not getting any feedback. Can you just give me some help? And so I sent him my tape and he's like, oh, I think I could get you a job. I think our weekend anchor might be leaving. Do you want that job? Do you want to try and see if you can do that? And I'm like, sure. And that was another thing I learned. Sometimes they kind of have in mind, they already kind of know who they want in mind for that job. Because then I remember flying out to Tulsa and thinking like, okay, as long as I don't screw this up, I think I could get this weekend anchor job. Do you know what I mean? And there's stacks of resume tapes, but it was a phone call where I knew him. I said, hey, I need your help. And so he gave me the weekend news anchor job. So it's like every single job I've had, it was like the only one. So you go and then you try to rock it.
Absolutely. And I love how you mentioned that it's difficult. I know that sometimes news looks glamorous and it looks easy, but it can be hard to get your foot in the door. So I love your message there of perseverance and not giving up. I do want to ask you too, because I love how you say that you made a phone call to a news director. Talk to us about the importance of making sure that you're keeping connections in every market you go to. I know that that's so important, the way that this industry works.
It is everything. I mean, down to photographers. I got my first internship from the secretary at the front desk at the CBS affiliate because she went to my home church. Like anybody in that building can help you, whether it is the janitor, whether it is somebody over in the marketing department. You have to, and I know people say that all the time, but you have to be kind to everyone and be open to receiving. I feel like sometimes we pray for a breakthrough or we like, oh man, I'm not getting this job or I don't know anybody. And there could be somebody right in front of your face who has a cousin who works at an affiliate in Topeka. Do you know what I mean? So it's constantly talking with people, networking with people. And when you finish that internship, you keep their information and you stay in touch with them and you build relationships. So that way, I'm in Springfield, I'm in a jam, nobody's responding to me. So I call an old boss and I say, hey, do you think you can help me out? And that turned into a job. So, and you're right, there's a lot of sacrifice. I mean, I've missed weddings, I've missed funerals, I've missed bachelorette parties, I've missed parties for friends' kids, I've missed get-togethers, I've missed family reunions, I've missed my grandparents' anniversary. I mean, there are times where you just can't make it to everything and you just have to kind of decide on whether this is something that is worth it. I think sometimes people see television and they think it's just this, like, I'm gonna close these shades. It's just a glamorous thing. But it's a lot of work. It's long hours sometimes, it's a lot of reading, it's a lot of writing. There's a lot of, I think you have to like people. I think you have to be a people person. I think you have to try to be somewhat likable and be curious and intrigued. And it can't stop, and I think that that's a huge part of it.
And I think that segues nicely into a question about work-life balance. Did you feel like there was a specific point in your career where you maybe started fighting more for being home for your husband and for your kids?
Yeah.
How did that look?
It was tough. So I will say my first, so when I was in Springfield and when I was in Tulsa and my first maybe 4 years in Philadelphia, I wasn't married. I didn't have any kids. And I remember going to the National Association of Black Journalists conference. That's another thing. NABJ has been a huge, huge part of my career. I mean, my last couple of jobs, Philly and the Today Show, were a result of NABJ. And so I remember one time being at NABJ. I think I was in Tulsa at the time. And I went up to Rahima Ellis, who's still a reporter for NBC News. She's an African-American woman. And I went up to her, I'm like, oh, how'd you get to the network? How's your, I admire you and da, 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 da. And she's like, oh, slow down, grasshopper. And she said, my advice to you, she said, I think you'll be fine in this business, but don't forget to make a life. She said, if you want to get married, get married. If you want to have children, have children. If you want to travel, travel. If you want to hop in that swimming pool, don't worry about your hair. Hop in that swimming pool. I mean, she just kind of, that wasn't the advice I thought I was going to get, but it really resonated with me, not to forget to make a life. And so when I was in Philly, after a few years, I was doing long distance. I think I did long distance for maybe 7 years. 6 years, I thought, okay, I think it's time for us to figure this out. And then the thing about a morning shift is it's challenging because you're always exhausted, but you can be home during the day. And also I think times are changing. It used to be, I think women, if they were pregnant on the air, they wore these big old muumuu dresses and tried to cover it up. And now I think things have changed. And so it's a part of who you are, especially as a journalist and as a TV anchor and a morning show anchor. When you tell the audience when you're ready that you're going to get married, they are so excited. If anything, they want to help you pick the flowers. They want to, they're living that with you. And, when we decided to start trying to have children and have my first son, I mean, I felt like the city of Philadelphia was like, lived it with me, and through all of it. And I'm 4'11", so I was huge, like my stomach, and then when I announced that I was having twins, it was like the whole city was celebrating. It was like, we did the big announcement. And so it almost feels like in that way, I became really part of the fabric of that city. I mean, they'd watched me from getting married to having 3 children, and you become part of the city. And so to me, that makes you better. It makes you a better journalist because, people will call you, you open up your horizons more. I just added, my mom used to say, just added to my quilts, if you will. And so there are some people who say, you know what, this isn't for me, and that's okay too. But I do think it's important to just look up and do a little self-assessment as, okay, this is how old I am. Where do I want my life to go? Because it's very easy to lose track of the years. And then you look up and you spent your whole lifetime trying to get to a city and it's thankless. Do you know what I mean? So you just can't forget to build a life.
Absolutely. And I know you mentioned a little bit earlier that liking people is important to this job because you have to be around people all the time. Talk with us about how long it took you to get really comfortable conducting interviews, and specifically with some of the high profile people that you do interview.
I think I heard Diane Sawyer say years ago that you have to be curious. I think you have to kind of be either a natural people person or somebody who is always, curious about what's happening around you and interested in people. And so for me, I remember when I was in Tulsa, we had this consultant come in. I think I was the weekend anchor at the time. A lot of my growth happened in Tulsa. Tulsa is near and dear to my heart. My father's from Claremore. My paternal grandmother lived in Claremore. So a lot happened for me in Tulsa as far as my own growth. And I remember having a consultant come, and I popped in my at that time, I think we'd moved up to DVDs from VHS tapes. And he was like, you're good, but I like her better. And he pointed to me in person. And I'm like, what do you mean? That is me. And he's like, no, I mean, that's like the news you. He's like, but you seem a little bit more energetic. And he's like, I just feel like you're kind of the same person, but I would like to see a little more of you on the air. And I thought in my head, well, I'm a news anchor. I'm anchoring 5 p.m. news or weekend or whatever it is. I'm not just gonna be like, ha, 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 So I, sometimes you take criticism or feedback and you say, that's not for me, but for the most part, I try to receive it. And so I remember the next weekend trying to say, okay, I feel like I'm me. How can I be more me? Double down on who I am. And at the time, we're all friends off the air. And I can't remember the name of the place. And it was it was a bar, and I can't remember where it was, but we would all go sometimes after the show. And the sports guy, one time I was talking to the sports guy and he said something and I said, all right, chocolate mojitos, if you da-da-da, or whatever it was, I made some joke. And he started laughing and it was just kind of like a moment because I named the place wherever it was in Tulsa. And it was funny and it was a moment as opposed to, now Dave Briggs, tell me about what's happening in sports tonight. You know what I mean? It just kind of, and it was kind of fun and it worked. So little moments like that, I started to realize like that has nothing to do with whether you're a credible news person. You're just friends with the people that you work with on the set. And so I think we started doing that a little more and developing chemistry, off camera, so that it really worked. And I learned from that. And I think that's how I ended up back in morning television, because a lot of morning television is chemistry and being able, because everybody can give you the headlines these days, but what makes you guys different? And so I think that if you are just now here the news person, I'm just not sure if that connects with people anymore, because they can just go to their phone and get their headlines. So I think for me, that was a turning point in my career. And so then when you're sitting down with, I'm trying to think of somebody who was intimidating, and not intimidating, but just smart, Condoleezza Rice. I remember sitting down with Condoleezza Rice, and I'm like, this woman, like, you can't tell her. I mean, she knows everything. So I tried to know my stuff, but also just a spirit of curiosity. Like, and we talked about her playing the piano and, how does she feel being a Republican or whatever it was. Like, if you meet people where they are and just really lock in on who they are as human beings with empathy, without judgment, and just letting them share. And you feel like, for me, I feel like I'm a vessel. And I feel like this is my purpose. And so it's not my purpose to judge you or whatever. I just want to hear you, let you share. If you approach it that way, it makes it a lot easier, because if you stumble, people will say, and you laugh at yourself, you get right back up. If you ask a tough question, they know that at the end of the day, you're not there to harm them or embarrass them, and they'll go with you for that question. You know what I mean? So I think it's all in how you treat people.
Absolutely.
I'm going to
ask you. For sure. And we'll talk a little bit about COVID, and then I'll throw it back over to you, Sam, so we can ask some of the questions that our students have submitted.
Oh my God, that made it work. Sorry.
No worries.
Okay, there we go. That's better.
And I think that this Zoom call is a great example of just how much things have changed over
I'm in my hotel room. I'm literally in the corner of my hotel room.
Talk to us about how COVID has impacted. You talked about it a little bit, but how it's impacted your career, the industry, and kind of where you see us going from here.
Well, for me personally, that was an interesting season. Like right when COVID started, a lot of people know I had vocal surgery February, I think it was 24th of 2020. And if you think about when this whole thing started, it was around March 13th-ish of 2020 when the world changed. So literally just a couple of weeks before that, I had like a tiny little, at the time I was a weekend news reader on the Today Show. And I would go to read my stories, they would toss to me. And my producer noticed that I was constantly going, I didn't even notice it, but I was constantly going. So she got in my ear one day. She's like, I think you need to go to an ENT, like maybe something's wrong. I'm like, no, it's fine. And I felt like I was losing my voice all the time. Long story short, they found like a tiny little polyp on my vocal cord, like smaller than the tip of a pin. And they showed me with the scope. But because of that, like, in order to talk, your vocal cords do this. And so if there's something in the way, the sound isn't clear. You can sound raspy. And so then I learned so much about voices. Like you may have a gym teacher from 4th grade who had that raspy voice. Chances are there's something there. It's not just, people don't just have raspy voices, but if you're not in news or you don't speak for a living, you just deal with it. So then I could watch TV and pick out people with polyps. I'm like, I remember when Dr. Anthony Fauci started, I was like, he has a polyp. I'm like, y'all hear his with that little rasp? And I ended up getting an interview with him because we talked about how we both have hot polyps because I could hear it. But anyway, so I started having vocal therapy like several times a week. So after I was on the air, I would rush off to vocal therapy, and that added like 3 hours of my time trying to learn how to massage it and talk around it. And eventually got to the point where I had to have surgery, and I was terrified. I was scared because I thought, gosh, what if something were to happen? They cut it off and mess up my voice. Like, I don't even know, but I couldn't go any further. Like it was getting to the point where they would call me to track a story in the morning, and I was nervous that my voice was gonna not hold. Like it was awful. So I finally decided to get the surgery. I like reached out to a Dell surgeon. I was like, I can't sing, so she can still sing afterwards. I should be able to talk. So I was gonna fly to Boston. I ended up finding, I think Trevor Noah had a polyp. I ended up finding his surgeon. Like I was like, I want to go to like somebody who's like, amazing, because I don't want this to be messed up. So my surgery was February 24th, and I had 8 weeks off. And so I remember we were going to go to Panama. My dad bought some timeshare thing, and I'm like, well, let's Panama. Why not? And we were just going to spend some time there. My kids were heading into spring break. And then we kept hearing about this thing called COVID. And we were like, you know what? I hear that people are getting stuck in customs and stuff. Maybe we should stay somewhere closer. And my doctor's like, have you ever been to South Carolina? Like, there's some pretty areas by the water, whatever. And I'm like, South Carolina? No, I don't know anybody in South Carolina. She's like, you should check it out. So we found an Airbnb in South Carolina. We were going to go there. I was going to recover for 2 weeks. And we ended up being there for 6 months, like 5-6 months, because then COVID happened, George Floyd happened, like all these things happened. And we were all in this place. And it ended up almost being a gift because we were outside of New York City. New York City was like ground zero at the time. Like COVID was awful there. And all our friends were telling us not to come back. There were sirens every night. Like, so just if we could extend our Airbnb just to keep trying, stay down there. Then eventually when it was time to go back on the air, everybody was remote. So I had to call the Airbnb people and try to explain that, hey, do you mind if your mantle is on the Today Show? They're like, what? And then they actually didn't mind it. So they would turn on and be like, that's my mantle. And then, the state was starting to like reel in like out of town people, especially you were from New York. So we felt like we were like on the run or something, like we were having to call and see if anybody would take us. And it ended up being 5 or 6 of the best months of my life, because for all my career, I have always been rushing off to work, my kids rushing off to school. We were all together. I mean, it was a Wi-Fi nightmare for 5 of us to all be on at once every day. I would go to start the 9 o'clock hour and I would hear good morning, like singing, and like it was an interesting time. But then when the show was over and they were finished with school, we were in a beautiful place. We didn't know anybody in South Carolina, so there were no obligations. And we really just had a beautiful time as a family. I mean, there were scary times where relatives would get sick or what have you, but thankfully it wasn't as bad. And so the silver lining for us was that we were able to spend that time together. And it changed me. It really did. Like, I came back to New York City very adamant that I was going to not take shoots after 3 o'clock, that I was going to be present with my kids. With all the George Floyd stuff, I would, speak up more about issues of race in the newsroom. I mean, it just really changed me for the better in many ways.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing with me today. I'm going to throw it back over to Sam, who has some questions from our students today.
Wonderful. And I would also like to welcome everybody who may have joined us in the middle of our chat. I know we had some students who were trying to make it after their morning classes, so welcome everyone. And please note, we do have the chat open. We have our faculty advisor, Mr. Goodwin, watching that. So if you have any questions you think of, go ahead, add those in there, and we'll keep an eye on them and try to get them in. So, and I do want to open this up to both of you. This is some general broadcast questions along with some little specific details. But first, kind of going back to the beginning, what is it like when you have to transition from market to market? Because obviously we know starting a new job is difficult, especially when you're walking into something where your personality and you're already supposed to feel like they know you. How is it overcoming that barrier?
You can start, Naomi. That's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think about my time coming out to Tulsa. I got on a plane 7 years ago and didn't even know where Tulsa was on a map. I have no family here. I had no connections here. And it was scary to think about transitioning to a new place that was going to be my new home. And Sam, just like you said, that was going to be a place where people were expecting me to be almost initially ingratiated into a community where I didn't know anybody. And I think that that's where, for me, it was really important to get plugged in right away with church, with organizations, so that I knew people, first of all, so that I had stories to pitch every day at the meeting to generate story ideas, but also so that I felt comfortable enough to feel like this was home. And that's what, to me, was really important about, I've been in this market for a long time, but what was important about being here for so long was so that I felt like this was home for me, so that when I'm telling stories in my community, it's not, I'm an outsider and this is what's happening here in Tulsa, but like these are things that impact me as well. And so kind of just getting ingratiated into this area, that was what was really important to me here.
I agree 1000%. I mentioned in Springfield, I didn't know anybody. In Tulsa, my paternal grandmother was in Claremore, and I'm from Wichita, so that was like 2 hours away. So Tulsa was similar to Wichita in many ways. And so I felt like Same thing. I got active with my sorority. I got active in church, and, I got active in NABJ, and you just kind of become part of the community. And before long, you're right. People are pitching you stories, or you bring, stories to the newsroom that are something that you experienced. And that's how it works pretty much every time you go. And then, moving to Philadelphia, it was very similar, but I moved, I was single when I got there, but my father was from there. I was born there. And then I would say moving to New York City was the toughest of all, because I moved to New York City with 2 triple strollers and 2 double strollers. I have twins and an older one. So it was to have 2 2-year-olds and a 5-year-old in New York City starting in network news. Like, I look back and I'm like, I don't even know how I did it, where childcare costs more than my house. It's just the price of everything, and the grit of the city. I'm from Kansas. Like, the pushing a stroller and it's like bumping to the point where you can't even push it. Like, it was madness. It was very difficult. And so if this isn't what you want to do, you don't know who you are, whose you are, it will break you. And when you sit down, you have to when you sit on that set, you have to bring all of what you have, your experience from Springfield and Tulsa and Philly and Kansas. And I bring all of that with me to the set. So that way you don't feel so intimidated, because it is a very intimidating place to be. And so you just kind of have to, I don't want to say fake it till you make it, but you just have to keep pushing forward and just try to get to know people. But it can be a challenge.
For sure. And I'm a transplant myself. I actually moved to Tulsa about 6 years ago. And so I'll admit, I use the kind of new visitor from out of town to my advantage a little bit at the beginning of, hey, I don't know this place. What are some recommendations? And that does help you get familiar. But I think you two are definitely right in the sense of, a lot of people may not realize it, but when you're in broadcasting, you move around a lot, especially at the beginning, as you're, going up to different markets. And there is a ranking system. So you usually start a small town and you move to a larger city, hopefully eventually New York or LA, something. Yeah.
I will say really quickly, the model is changing in some ways. We have a lot of production assistants and writers in the digital department and Peacock and streaming today all day, who are just out of college or just out of grad school. And it never used to be that way. But if you're really good at social media, or you're really good at, digital marketing or storytelling, you may not have to do the whole start in the middle of nowhere and climb up. Like, there are ways now to, if you have family in a bigger city, to get a job in digital, I think.
And seize the opportunity, right? When they pop up, take advantage of it. So kind of going to, when you're crafting stories, what is a human interest story to you? Like, what makes a good human interest story? Is it something the community? Is it a certain topic? What speaks well to the audience?
Naomi?
Yeah, truthfully, I think anything can be a human interest story, just as long as you have what we call characters. And that's really just somebody who is directly impacted by what you're talking about. I remember just a couple of weeks ago, I did a story about a bill that's working its way through the Oklahoma legislature right now about removing the grocery tax, right? And so that can seem like a pretty institutionalized story, but it impacts every single one of us. If I don't have to pay 4.5% on my taxes when I'm at the grocery store, that's huge. So finding that character, we went to a grocery store, found people who would be directly affected by that, and talked about why they thought that that was important to them. To me, that's a human interest story. It's something that every single person in our community can relate to.
Definitely.
I agree. I think, in every city, I think that's how you, I think everyone has a story. And so I think it's just a matter of us figuring out a way to tell that story, to connect with people. I will admit, it gets a little harder to break through at the national level. It's a little overwhelming for me. I get dozens and dozens and dozens of pitches a day. And most of them either know someone who knows me, so they feel like there's a connection, and it gets, it's a challenge because it's hard to break through because everybody has a story. So I think at the national level, they try to it just depends on the day. It depends on, there's so many variables. Well, one day they may not think it's a story. The next day they say, hey, let's go do that story. So sometimes you just have to be relentless. So, hey, let's remember that guy that I told you about that lives in Tulsa who blah, 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 blah. You know what I mean? But I think that's what people want to see. In fact, when I sit down now on the national level, I feel like that's kind of what sets me apart too, is because I've done, I grew up in local, we bring that sensibility to the network. Like it's not, I'm not, oh, now hear the news. Like, I'm like, can I tell you what just happened yesterday at the store? You know what I mean? That's, for me, you kind of need both. And that's kind of, to me, it's real people. You know what I mean?
It's like that small town community feel, even in your big city, right? It can make you, can kind of warm your heart a little bit, make you a little bit more comfortable. So, and I love what you brought up about kind of crafting those stories. And so when considering things like identity, whether it's race, gender, orientation, or any other facet of identity, how does that affect or influence the subjects you cover and how you cover those?
I'm going to piggyback a little bit off of Sheinelle, what you said earlier, that after George Floyd happened last year, you took some more time to speak up about issues of race in the newsroom. And I think that that was such a pivotal time, obviously for us as a country, but specifically for us as journalists. And I know specifically for me as a Black journalist, that it is so important that anytime we cover stories that have to deal with race or with identity, that we are being very careful and very responsible in how we're telling those stories. I know that I go into every story just really wanting to listen and really want to understand and really want to tell every side of the story to the best of my ability. But I know specifically with stories that that deal with issues of race, it's really, really important that we are listening completely and telling that story in a way that will really honor the people that we are talking about, and really explain issues that I know for me as a Black woman in our Black community, that really explains what we deal with on a level that maybe people don't understand all the time. So I know that that's something that I'm really passionate about, is making sure that our stories are being told in a way that honors our community.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I agree with that. As far as identity is concerned, look, people tease news anchors that we have like the part in the helmet hair. I've had the same hair since like 4th grade. But for a while, like I started wearing my hair natural. I started doing twist outs and stuff like that because my daughter has a little afro and she has 2 little afro puffs. And she started to ask me why our hair didn't look alike, and why, I would get braids on vacation, or I'd wear a puffy on vacation, not on television. And it checked me. Because I'm like, if a 9-year-old notices that, what is that saying? And so, I did a post about it. I wore my natural hair on the show. And now some days I'll do a Diana Ross ponytail and other days I'll part it and press it out. But little things like that matter. And to me, that even transcends storytelling, or that's part of my storytelling. So in addition to the stories that I bring every day, I also think who I am and who I, just sitting down, me being me, is also part of what we do. I remember after George Floyd, we stopped the program and we just had an honest conversation. And I did it with Al Roker, Craig Melvin, and Dylan Dreyer. They're Black men. She's a white female. Craig is in a racial marriage. I mean, we all have different things in our lives. And because we're friends and because we trust each other, we were able to sit down on national television and have an honest discussion about how it was resonating with us personally and our families. And it was a game changer for us. And then we can laugh the next moment, you know what I mean? But I think it's important that if you are your whole self and everybody uses the word authentic these days, but if you are, then the audience or the reader will kind of be willing to go with you, because that's life. Not every day is happy and not every day is sad, but that range to me is how you truly connect. And so I don't think I could connect if I didn't talk about how my boys were affected after George Floyd and why they were asking all these questions. And I had to sit down and have a conversation, and how my son was crying because he was scared, and all those things. Like, it's important to talk about those things. And people at home can either relate to it or learn from it, I think.
Yeah, and those are great points. And I love that you made sure to establish that level of trust where you were felt comfortable to actually talk and, bring identity into the conversation. And so that's kind of talking about how your personal life is coming and affected in your reporting. Do you find that your reporting affects your personal life sometimes? It can be something big, minor. I know I grew up in a radio family. So little things like I realized when my mom would call the school, she turned on her radio voice. All of a sudden it sounded very different, right? But do you find those moments where you find maybe that reporter mindset or that personality kind of bleeding into your personal life a little bit?
I would say that yes and no. Yes, in the sense that my personality is, I think, the reason I do what I do. I'm always curious. I'm always asking questions. I always want to know what's going on. And I feel like those are some of the tenets of being a journalist. So I would say yes, in the sense that, like, I'll go to the grocery store and I'll be talking with somebody and I'm like, oh, that would be an interesting story. Like, here's my card. Like, let me write down that information. I feel like in that way, my life is also my career. But also I do try to, as much as I can, keep things separate so that I can come home and not only talk with my fiance about every single thing that's going on in Tulsa right now, but we can have conversations that are not work related as well.
Wonderful.
I'm sitting here. That was such a good response. I forgot what I was going to say. Mine's a little different now with social media because I notice I treat Twitter differently than I do Instagram. I have more family stuff on Instagram, but even now with my twins in 4th grade, my oldest in 6th grade, I have to be careful now about what I post. Like I used to, if they wrote a letter to the Tooth Fairy, I'd post it and, but now something happened the other day that my 6th grader did. And he goes, Mom, you're not going to post that, are you? And I think I was gonna. And I was like, oh, okay, no problem. And ever since then, like, I don't, I ask their permission if, they want me to post it, because now it's weird because my 6th grader is also on Instagram. So sometimes I'll post something and I'll see that he liked my post. And then it's like, oh, that's weird. And then sometimes like I'll like his post. So it's like uncharted water there. And even now, like, it's been the weather's been kind of crappy in New York City and the kids are like, where are you, mommy? So I haven't posted from LA where normally I would have, but I don't want to make them feel bad. So it's like, it's weird things like that. But then also, again, it informs who you are, because then I will on the show, I may not talk about him specifically, but I can say, hey, I did a Black History Roundtable with some middle schoolers that I was going to post later today. And I got the idea from my middle schooler because he was just talking away. He said, you should interview kids my age. And I'm like, okay, you know what I mean? So they're aware of what I do. Sometimes it's a little tricky at school or, like the kids are, if I pick them up, they don't want me to look like a news lady. Like they'd rather me, I don't know, like things like that. Like they want mom,
I get that completely. I mean, I remember occasionally I get picked up in a station vehicle and it was cool when it was a cool station, news station. It wasn't as fun as a grade schooler, right? Like, oh, news talk, not a big deal.
Yeah.
So kind of moving on to some things on the job again, what news story do you maybe wish you could have reported on? Maybe as well when you were younger and you were up and coming, or maybe just a news story like, man, I wish I would have thought of that. Do you have any that kind of just you wanted to cover?
Do you have any, Naomi?
That's something I would have to think about. You know what I mean? There's nothing that comes to the top of my head right now.
Well, and that might be a good sign. You've covered a lot of stories you want to cover, right?
I mean, sure. I mean, there are people I would love to interview. Don't get me. I mean, please, I'd love to sit down and be like, okay, Barack Obama, you sit there. Oprah, you sit there. Beyonce, you sit there. Let's talk. But the cool thing is, for the most part, if managers are where they should be mentally, to me, if a reporter comes to you and says, hey, I really want to go for this, I think they should say yes. I mean, unless it's just something extra crazy, but for the most part, I don't think I've ever asked to cover something that's in my lane that they've said no to. I don't think that's happened.
Okay. Well, again, that might be a great sign, right? keep it up. So we do know that news and journalism in general cover a variety of topics and themes, but there's also a variety in the type of reporting you do, whether it's on TV, whether it's for a morning show interview or a special programming. but there's also, newspaper, there's radio. I know, Sheinelle, you had some experience, I believe, working in some other mediums. And Naomi, you as well have some producing experience. Did you find that having those other experiences helped you in your job today?
I would say absolutely. So when I worked in Columbus, Georgia, I produced and anchored for myself. So I would write the whole show, put the whole show together, and then I would anchor the show as well. And I feel like that has honestly been one of the most instrumental skills in helping me become the journalist that I am today, because it allowed me to not only think about the specific story that I was telling, but how it fit in the larger scale of what our newscast looked like for that day. And so when I'm going out and when I'm interviewing people, I can have that mindset of not just, okay, I'm going to listen to these interviews and then I'm going to write them as a part of my story, but I can kind of understand the bigger picture of how this is going to fit and everything else that's happening for the day. So I definitely think that producing experience that I have, and then just kind of working with my producers very closely on the show that I anchor now and the show that I anchored when I was at Fox as well, it just has really, really been able to help me in my reporting every day.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I think so too. So like I said, I started out as a one-man band, and you get credit from photographers when they know that you have also done it, right? And you get it, even just framing a shot or lighting or whatever. I do a radio show, and I think it allows me to show a different side of myself. I think we enjoy it. It's serious radio, so, we're pretty free. I do a family show on Saturday mornings, which is another layer, so I like to be able to stretch a little bit. I just produced that documentary, Stories We Tell in Fertility. And that came from, frankly, so many of my girlfriends were in their 40s and thinking about having children. And some of them were having challenges. Some of them were going to try to freeze their eggs. I just felt like it was a topic that was happening, and it didn't really fit what we cover on the Today Show, but I felt like it was a story. So I had to fight for it. I had to get funding. I had to ask some friends that they would do it. And I'd never been a producer before, but I teamed up with a college friend who is a producer, and we made it, sold it to MSNBC, and it aired. And it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my career, but it was also the most rewarding thing I've ever done to do, to produce a documentary. That's it sounds cool, but I never thought I could do it. And frankly, I'm here in LA. They honor me for it at this organization for this fertility coverage. And it was weird because when they were talking about me and why I was getting this award, they're like, she's an executive producer of a documentary. And so the news thing was part of it, but that was the focus. And so I was like, oh, wow. And that just came from an idea in my head and just pushing to try to make it happen. So I think if you're sitting there and you like to write, so you think about maybe working for a magazine, but you also maybe want to do a podcast, or you may want to write a column for a local paper, like I say, do it, because these days people wear multiple hats and it's all storytelling, just in different forms.
And I think you hit a key point there of storytelling. We're doing in journalism, you're doing the job of getting the story out there. So sometimes that means choosing the best format for it to be received, right? And so technology kind of helped with that, because it's open doors. You can start learning, on your own. You can do remote work from your bedroom. You can do it all over the world, right? And so in your experience, both of you, have you seen media change as a result of technology? And then where do you think media might be heading?
So I would say two things. First of all, Zoom interviews or interviews over the computer have been huge. And to me, over the last couple of years, have changed a lot of the way that we do journalism. It used to be that you would go into the newsroom and you would say, hey, I'm trying to talk with this person, but they can't meet me today because they're busy. And so I can't do that story today. And so now I have to go find something else to do. Now I'm like, okay, well, I can send them a Zoom link and they can talk with me over Zoom. To me, it has made our jobs much, much easier, much more flexible. I can sit here at my house and do a Zoom interview with somebody and never even go into the station for the day and still be able to put together a complete story. So I think that that has changed tremendously. And then, excuse me, social media as well. I know when I first started reporting and anchoring, they were like, here's our Facebook page, make sure that you're posting every so often, it's fine. Now it's like, this is our top priority. You need to be posting on Facebook before your story ever even airs that evening. You need to be posting multiple times. You not only need to be posting what your story is, but you need to be showing people your authentic self and what you're doing in your life as well. And I think that those are two big things just over the course of the time that I've been an anchor and a reporter that I have seen change dramatically as far as technology is concerned. And I think that we're just going to continue to head in that direction. We'll see more newscasts online and not necessarily the appointment viewing that newscasts are based on right now, where somebody sits down, which I don't know how many people do this anymore, but sits down at 5 and 6 and 10 and watches TV. I think it's going to be a lot more digital because that's where people are right now.
I agree. I mean, we have now, I feel like a large part of my job is streaming. The Today Show streams Today All Day, and this wellness show is streaming. Like, I think, you know, networks recognize that younger folks, like my kids, don't really have appointment television. There's no show every Thursday at 9 that they want to see. Like, they can just go to whatever outlet it is and it's just there, and they can either binge it all or, you know what I mean? So I just think the way young adults and kids and tweens approach watching television is different. And so news, there's always going to be a need for journalism. There's always a need for storytelling, but we are having to figure out how to reach them.
For sure. And I'm sure that affects how you're constructing your story sometimes too, right? Because it's a different format on social media where it tends to be shorter versus you have a long period. So especially when you're crafting your stories or when you're producing content, do you find your mindset changing a little bit when you're designing your stories?
So for example, like if I am, let's say, teasing a story on Facebook, people's attention span on social media is much shorter. Nobody is going to sit and watch a 3, 4, 5 minute video on social. So I take like the best soundbite of my story that day, the most important or impactful thing that somebody said, and I put that on my Facebook page or put that on, Instagram. To let people know, hey, you should really come and once the story airs tonight and come and watch that, kind of as a teasing element. We're still pretty much in the mindset that we're creating content for TV, but we have a lot of other platforms that we're still working on as well. And I'm sure from my perspective that things will start to change as we're creating specific content for different platforms.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Do you want me to respond to that too?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And especially because I know you have a little experience with Peacock TV and things. And that's being a streaming service. Do you also find the, I guess, framework change a little bit?
I think sometimes maybe if you're doing an interview, it's everything she just said. And also if you're doing an interview and you feel like you can't fit it all into your package, sometimes you can say, oh, for more, go to today.com, or we put the extended interview on our streaming channel, or sometimes I'll interview somebody and I'm like, oh man, like everything was so good. So now we can put extended cuts, on streaming. So that helps too.
Wonderful. And that's a great thing about online, especially whether it's articles in print or on TV. If you go outside of your limit, you can bring it all back online. You can have the full content. If you want to find out more, you can delve further, especially if you have that curiosity. And so we have our final question for today. Do you have any parting words of advice or anything else you want to share for our aspiring journalists before we head out today?
Do you want to go first? Do you want me?
You can go first.
Okay.
It's the big question. Yeah.
So I think I have two things to say, and it's been incredible hearing your story, specifically about your story of starting in this industry, because I'm like, oh, good, it wasn't just me who was sending out a ton of tapes and only getting a couple of calls back. So I say
I didn't get a couple. I got a lot. Yeah.
Right. I'm like, okay, good. It wasn't great. It's not anything that has to do with me. Awesome. But I say that to say, I would encourage everybody, do not give up. If this is something that you want to do, you just continue to have to try, because one callback is all you need. You only need to work at one station to get your foot in the door. So that's the first thing that I would say is just, if this is something you're interested in, just continue to try, continue to push to get in the industry. And then the second thing that I would say, it's very personal to me. Don't be afraid to retool your dreams. I say that to say, when I first started in journalism school, I told myself, Naomi, if you are not in a top 10 market by the time you're 30, you have failed. Like, you are not the journalist that you need to be. I'm 31 and I've been in the same market for the last 7 years, and I'm happier than I've ever been. And I never thought when I moved to Tulsa in 2015 that I would still be here in 2022. And so I say that to say, you can go into college, you can leave journalism school, you can even go into your first market and think, okay, this is exactly where I want to be, and this is exactly what I want to be doing. And that's amazing, and that's wonderful. But don't be afraid to retool. If you get someplace and you're like, I really like it here, I have a lot of good friends here, I have a good life here, this is a job that I really like, don't be afraid to stick around and to explore those opportunities too.
I love that. I love that. It's kind of goes with the don't forget to make a life, because you can get to some city and it's some big city and, oh, you made it as a reporter. I know so many people, but then it's not the kind of city you really want to live in. And then you're, chasing ambulances all day, and it's like, you're not seeing your family, you know what I mean? So there's that work-life balance that I think is important. I remember when I was an intern in college, and I've said this before, they said, ask for what you want, take what you get, and use what you get to get what you want. And I think that that's kind of what a lot of us have done. You ask for what you want. You do have to verbalize it and visualize it and decide kind of what you want. And even if it changes, you do need you need a compass to try to steer you in some direction. There are some kids who may be an intern, but they really don't want to be here. They'd rather work as a vet. You know what I mean? It's like, that's a lot. But if you can try to set a vision for your life, at least for that moment, and go after it that way, I think you may not get what you want, but you keep going, and then you take that and use that to get something else. I mean, that's kind of how I've been able to kind of navigate. And then again, I go back to living a full and centered life and making sure that your mental health is in check and that your health is okay, and that you are, if you're a family person, that you try to find a place where you can be with your family. So not to let your goal that one goal get in the way of the other things in your life, because if you don't have your mental health, what good can you be? Or if you don't feel well, or you don't feel healthy, you're not any good for yourself. Do you know what I mean? So I think trying to constantly do a gut check, a spirit check, a mental health wellness check to make sure that they're all in alignment, I think is a good thing.
For sure. And I like what you brought about doing that check-in, seeing where you are. And I think they kind of speak to each other of, you have that goal, where you're striving, but also check in and see where you are, see where you've been. And, if you're working towards that positive growth, you're set.
Yeah.
So thank you both so much for joining me today, for joining us here. We've had a few people mention Tulsa's lucky to have you. We're lucky to have both of you here today. So thank you for joining us. I know, Naomi, you've been working, and then Sheinelle, you're in LA right now from your hotel room. So thank you for joining us. I would like to thank all of our attendees, our audience, for joining us today as well. Just a quick reminder, we will have this available later today. So if somebody missed it, if you want to share it with someone, we will have it available on YouTube and Facebook and all the little links. So make sure you follow us if you'd like that information. I'd like to thank our school, Tulsa Community College, President Goodson, Dr. Copeland, Dr. Stone, Dean Clark, who I saw here today, Ms. Michelle Dixon, the TCC Marketing and Communications Department, Dr. Bailey, and our faculty advisor for the Connection student newspaper, Mr. Jerry Goodwin, and also our co-sponsors for the Digital Media and Design and Visual Arts academic programs, KJRH Channel 2, NBC, Circle Cinema, National Association of Black Journalists Tulsa, Chapter, the Oklahoma Eagle, and the Tulsa Press Club. And we have concluded our hour today. So thank you all for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
And nice to meet you, Naomi.
Nice to meet you.
Keep an eye on the screens. See these lovely ladies doing their wonderful jobs. So
thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.